Welcome to Coffee Commerce. My name is Sean Ramett and I'm the grandson of a coffee farmer from Guyana, South America. On Coffee Commerce, we talk about the stories behind coffee as they relate to business, society, ideas, just long enough for you to enjoy a cup of coffee. We've been talking about Coffeehouse Spies, including in the Ottoman Empire, to get the pulse of the public opinion. And in our last episode, we focused on the French monarchy's use of spies to gather intelligence in the interest of national security, or at least security of the throne, as well as just gathering interesting information. We now turn our attention back to England, and in particular, the reign of King Charles II in the late 1600s after the English Civil War. Out of the Civil War, Oliver Cromwell ruled the land for a time, and King Charles I was executed. The monarchy's reign was put on hold, with Charles II being sent to France for his safety. Cromwell's reign would be short-lived, and Charles II returned to England to take the throne. But things would be different in England. People were not necessarily convinced that the appointment of a monarchy was entirely divinely inspired. New thoughts and challenges were forming about the future of the monarchy. These thoughts were most prolific in coffee houses across England. Unlike taverns, which were places for more private gatherings, coffee houses were public forums. They sparked debate, new thought, and ideas that would engage their patrons. Charles II and many of the ruling class were concerned about the coffeehouse rage. But not just Charles II and those in power. Women played a key role in the various paradigm shifts in England during the 1600s. They made history. From religious beliefs, civil war, and other hot topics of the day, women who are not allowed to patronize coffee houses, although they were allowed to own a coffee house, were not fans of coffee or coffee houses. They felt that the men were spending too much time in coffee houses, which was taking them away from their families. Along came a women's petition against coffee, stating the negative aspects of the drink. Some say it was an organized group of women that put the petition together. Others say it was the ruling class who used the growing influence of women to post the petition. Charles II used this opportunity to try and ban coffee houses. There was a great public outrage. Fearing another revolt, Charles II and the leaders of the day stepped back from their position on coffee houses and allowed them to remain as is. Coffee would continue to play a key role in Western society and even British commerce. King Charles II's father, Charles I, had been decapitated during the English Civil War. So King Charles II was understandably paranoid about his subjects gathering to talk about the throne and politics around the throne. On June 12, 1672, Charles II issued a proclamation to restrain the spread of false news and licentious talk of matters of the state and government. It went on to say, men have assumed to themselves a liberty not only in coffee houses, but in other places of meeting, both public and private, to censure and defame proceedings of state by speaking evil of things they understand not. To combat this evil, Secretary of State Sir Joseph Williamson embedded a network of spies in London coffee houses. Despite their popularity, there were those who saw both coffee and coffee houses as negative influences on public morals and behavior. The authorities worried, perhaps justifiably, that coffee houses were a breeding ground of agitation. In 1675, King Charles II issued a proclamation against them, saying that they produce very evil, dangerous effects, for that in such houses, diverse, false, malicious, and scandalous reports are devised and spread abroad, to the defamation of His Majesty's government, and to the disturbance of the peace and the quiet of the realm. This provoked a public outcry, and Charles once again backed down, setting a rather vague order that the owners of the coffee houses should refuse admittance to spies and mischief makers. Coffee houses were also the target of much mockery. In his bitingly satirical 1703 book, The London Spy, writer and publican Ned Ward dismissed coffee houses as grubby dens stuffed with a parcel of muddling muckworms, some going, some coming, some scribbling, some talking, some drinking, others jangling, and the whole room stinking of tobacco like a Dutch barge. However, defenders of coffee houses maintain that the stimulated sociability and intellectual debate, besides which they exercise a sobering function on the population as they drew people away from the taverns. They also argued that the coffee itself was beneficial to one's health. Notwithstanding, opponents claimed that coffee tasted like the syrup of soot and the essence of an old shoe. The spirit of revolution, which had kicked up in England during this time, under what they would call the Glorious Revolution, were infused in coffee houses. Men gathered to discuss current affairs and could, without penalty, as long as they didn't get caught or argue too forcefully against the king, discuss their own viewpoints on domestic and foreign policies. Macaulay, a historian writing in the 1800s, believed that coffee houses were vital to public workings in the city. He went on to say, "The coffee house must not be dismissed with a cursory mention. It might indeed at that time have been not improperly called a most important political institution." No parliament had sat for years. The municipal council of the city had ceased to speak the sense of the citizens. Public meetings, resolutions, and the rest of the modern machinery of agitation had not yet come into the mainstream. Nothing resembled the modern newspaper existed. In such circumstances, the coffee houses were the main artery through which the public opinion expressed itself. The country was in the throes of political change. In late 1666, Charles II conferred with his High Chancellor, the Earl of Clarendon, to discuss the possibility of suppressing the coffee house outright. Clarendon agreed with the king that this was his desire, given that coffee houses allowed the foulest imputations to be laid upon the government, and that people generally believed that those houses had a charter of privilege to speak what they would, without being in danger to be called in question. He proposed banning the coffee houses by royal proclamation, as well as the skillful use of spies to record the conversations of those who persisted in deriding the government so publicly. Charles agreed with the suggestion and asked Clarendon to propose a suppression of the coffee houses in a meeting of the Privy Council. The proposal did not gain traction, however. It was the Secretary of State, William Coventry, who argued that the excise duties on coffee were valuable to the crown, and that such a total ban might stir up even greater resentment against the monarchy. Besides, he said, the king's friends had used more liberty of speech in coffee houses than they durst do in any other. The king was swayed and the matter was dismissed, at least for the moment. Quoting an article of that day, "Great liberty some take to suffer the coffee house with news, was understood by many, and not just the king, to be a grievous breach of national security." In October 1676, a plan to engage in a naval expedition against the pirates of Algiers was scuttled because the news had been leaked to the London coffee houses, and it was feared that the word would get back to the pirates. It was believed the pirates had very good spies in London, in the coffee houses in particular. Samuel Pepys, who was a patron of coffee houses, reported the leak to the king. So once again, a number of offender coffeehouse keepers were brought before the king and his privy council. They were warned not to take it in any newspapers and strongly interrogated as to the source of the story of the Algiers expedition. By November, Secretary of State Williamson had learned that the leak came from his own office. 2 clerks working for him had been provided sensitive intelligence about foreign affairs to coffeehouse newsletter writers. The issue of allowing the continued licensing of coffeehouses in general, therefore, came up again when the king's second 6-month extension had expired. In January 1677, after the debacle over the Algiers intelligence leak, the king was not inclined to be as gracious as he had been in the past. A group of leading coffeehouse men and coffeehouse women petitioned His Majesty once more to allow them to continue practicing their trade. The king accepted their petition, but he added an important provision. If at any time the hereafter the petitioners or any of them have misbehaved themselves or not punctually observed their promises and engagement not to accept libels or scandalous discourse, he warned that he might rescind this gracious favor and indulgence to them. The people had spoken. Coffee was here to stay, at least for now. But that's another story for another cup of coffee. Thank you.